Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session on the role AI in research administration. So we're going to start off with a couple of Zoom reminders. So if you experience any issues, please call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. The audio will be streamed through your speakers, and you could submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This session is recorded, and that recording, along with the slides and session summaries, will be posted shortly after the event at our website, thefdt.org. So I'm going to pass it off to Michelle to introduce the session and our speaker.
Welcome to everyone to our second plenary of the FDP. We're really pleased that you could join us and delighted that Professor Jansu Janja can join us to present her work. She is the Research Associate Professor in Philosophy and Director of the Responsible AI Practice at the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University. She's also the founder and director of the AI Ethics Lab, one of the first initiatives focusing exclusively on advising practitioners and conducting multidisciplinary research on AI ethics, something I think we're all keenly interested in. She serves as an expert consultant to the UN and the Interpol, is a member of the World Economic Forum's AI Governance Alliance Working Group, and a founding editor for AI and Ethics, which is a scholarly journal. She is also an ethics expert for EU and NIH-funded research projects. Her PhD is in philosophy, specializing in applied ethics, and she primarily works on ethics of technology, having previously worked on the ethics of health. She'll be talking to us today about the incorporation of ethical models in the AI space. This talk will frame how institutions should consider ethics as they develop their AI programs. Specifically, she will address the impact of AI on the IRB and other regulatory processes. And after this, please help me give a warm welcome to our plenary speaker. Thank you, Dr. Janja.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So let me try to share my screen without any mistakes. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. So I tried to both narrow down the topic by initially already narrowing it down a little bit by the title, but then also I think I'm slightly broadening it as well. So bear with me as I try to sort of like give you as much of a preview or information related to how AI, how ethics combine in the research space. So it's a little, the topic is really broad, and there's a lot of areas where we are, the different aspects of AI and research that we are working on from the ethics perspective. So I have structured the talk in such a way that hopefully we are going to go over a lot of the topics, but of course the depth will be limited. So if you have questions about specific parts, just please feel free to put them on the questions and answers, and we'll get to that by the end of the talk. So we already did my bio, so I'm going to skip this slide already. I want to start by very brief intro of what is AI, and a slightly longer intro of what is AI ethics before we get into this combination between AI ethics and research. So when we say AI, of course, definitions are always problematic and tricky, and every definition has its weaknesses. So there is no agreed upon definition on AI. In fact, a lot of the times the conversation becomes like, if we start using a particular algorithm so often, and it's sort of like a simple linear regression model, and people start questioning, well, is this really AI? So AI always has this reputation of being something almost slightly a little bit out of our reach, although it does encompass a lot of the things that we are currently using. So a general description is AI is intelligent machines, agents that perceive their environment, that function in accordance with their perception of the environment and take actions to maximize success, however we define that success. So we give them the purpose and the goal, and write the structure, write the model in such a way to so that they try to maximize this purpose. And in our daily life at this point, we are using AI all the time. So again, it's not just the novel technologies such as ChatGPT or large language models, but rather things that we are using, again, as soon as we start opening our computers. So our emails go through spam filters that use AI systems. While writing an email, the autocomplete is structured through AI systems. The search engines are completely driven by AI systems. Social media, all of these you already know. We have been discussing all of these already for a couple of years now. But just to remind ourselves, our social media, most of our interaction with the with different types of searches. So if you're searching for a movie, if you're searching for music, if you're searching for groceries on Amazon, they are ranked, often priced, and provided to you and suggested to you through AI systems. There are also some of the uses that we are not immediately aware of, but we encounter again all the time. So when we talk to customer services, for example, there's often an AI system that keeps collecting that data so that they can analyze and determine what are the most pressing issues that the customers are dealing with, what are the ways that the customers get frustrated about, and so on. In terms of matching, an AI model is almost always involved. By matching, I mean you apply for a job. So first of all, you need to match with the job in the sense that you find the job, and usually that already most of the platforms rank and provide the jobs for you to see. And the other way around, the employees see CVs through a ranking and ordering structure. Again, the matching happens by both sides getting information that are filtered through AI systems. And of course, we can expand this matching to educational system, to romantic lives. So there are all sorts of, to healthcare services, all these type of matchings happen through AI systems. So in other words, how we create AI systems, how we do research to create AI systems are extremely important, because a particular risk algorithm or a particular recommendation system could be initially used for customer services, but then can be used for law enforcement. It could be initially for the matching of romantic partners, but then a similar algorithm could be used for the matching of financial services. So what we create, the research that we do, the design and development that we do on AI systems are in that sense critical from the very beginning. I like saying at this point, I think just to make sure that we understand the weight of the work that we are doing in AI, we are creating a social structure, basically. We are creating a new social structure that is structured through these algorithms, which are increasingly also connected to each other. So everything that we do has a lot of importance and has repercussions that goes usually often beyond our immediate expectations. So we hear all of these different ways of describing AI system, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, and these are the best way to think about them as narrowing down of a particular path. So by the time we get to generative AI is a type of deep learning, a type of neural network, a type of machine learning, and a type of artificial intelligence. And large language models like ChatGPT that most of us are now using and dealing with, trying to figure out how to find best ways of using without causing ethical issues. These are a part of the generative AI models. So it's like a nesting dolls in this sense. Issues that exist in one of these, basically issues that exist in artificial intelligence are carried through all of these smaller, more specified structures of AI systems. And sometimes new problems, not sometimes, always, new problems arise when we get more and more specialized. So large language models have issues that not every AI system has, and novel issues that they present to us, which we'll get to a little later. So this is the general AI structure. What we do, what are we talking about when we say AI ethics? One way to think about AI ethics is to think about the goal of AI ethics in these three sections. So we want to make sure that we develop and design ethical technologies, by which I mean every technology is value laden. So when we decide which information to include, when we decide what success to define for the model, when we decide which model to choose, when we decide how to optimize, all of these decisions are value-laden decisions. So eventually, the structure, the system that we create in itself is never value-free. So what we want to make sure that the values that are incorporated into the design of the technology is already values that we are comfortable with, we prefer. So the outcomes are as ethically preferable, defensible as possible to start with. But of course, creating a product, creating a content, it just doesn't happen by itself. There's a big process of research and development and iterations and so on. So we want to make sure that the development stage happens, the process of development happens as ethically as possible as well. And here we get into the chunk of the research ethics conversation, and the AI research conversation happens, of course, in this section, as well as the content, of course. And finally, the implementation. So if we have made a mistake in the process and in the content, in the implementation, we are already in a difficult position to implement it ethically. If the system in itself brings ethical issues with itself, it's very difficult to implement it in a way that does not cause harm. But even if we have done the best we can for the content and the process, we may still implement it in a wrong way. So what we want to make sure we do is that the systems that we develop in one context for one purpose are not carried over to another context, to another purpose, without paying very close attention to. We want to make sure that throughout the deployment stages, we pay attention what new issues arise and what needs to be further monitored. And of course, we want to make sure that we communicate the information about the system to those who are implementing it correctly, so that they know how to engage with the system. So here you can think of it like this, for example. Usually we have this discussion that one of the main topics of AI ethics is how can we make sure that human agency is not lost, and how can we make sure that AI systems augment human capacity in whichever goal that we are talking about, right? Like it could be in risk management, it could be in recommendation systems, but how can we make sure that an expert human and the AI system collaborate? And that requires in implementation, for example, that the human to understand what are the weaknesses of this AI system, where can it make mistakes, how did it reach its results? So all of these informations are necessary for the human to be able to judge the AI system's outcome. If we cannot judge the AI system's outcome, then we also cannot intelligently partner with it. We can only say, I don't think it's right, or this seems wrong to me, but that's all we can really say if we don't understand how the system works. So in order to make sure that we hit these three aspects of our AI ethics goals, we have to focus throughout the whole innovation cycle. So the questions never end. We cannot stop at the research phase in asking ethical questions. We have to continue in the development, in the design, in the deployment, in monitoring, and in updating of these systems. And as you all know, AI systems don't develop in this very beautiful linear way, but there are a lot of feedback loops and iterations. So many times the development goes back to research. Many times the design goes back to development, sometimes even all the way back to research. And sometimes in monitoring, we recognize problems that are so deep that we go again all the way back to research, or just change certain parts in the design aspect of it. And focusing the whole innovation cycle also means focusing on different aspects of the AI system. So we need to make sure that we look at the data from in an ethically critical way. So what we want to know is the data that goes into the system, is this the appropriate data? Meaning, does it represent the world as it needs to be represented for this model to work well? Just giving examples, I have some more examples, but I can start giving examples already. For example, you all have heard of the facial recognition technologies that do not recognize the darker female faces as well as they recognize the white, lighter male faces. The error rate when the main big study came out in 2018, I believe, the error rate for the male face recognition, light color male face recognition was 0.7%, whereas the darker females have the error rate of 34.9% of error rate. So that means that there is a huge discrepancy between how the system works for one group versus another group. So for this system to work better, the one of the most important things is that it learns from a data that represents all of these different colors and genders so that it is as confident about its predictions for different people. So the data here was a major problem. The data did not represent what the world looks like. Sometimes the problem is even more complex with what data goes in. Sometimes the data represents the world perfectly to the point that it represents everything that is wrong with the world as well. So for example, when we think about predictive policing systems that use the research shows that our policing structure around the world and in the US as well have racial discrimination embedded in it. So certain neighborhoods, certain racially Black neighborhoods are usually more policed and more, there's over policing and there is more inclusion to the criminal justice system in a negative way in the Black neighborhoods. And for that reason, for Black people than the white neighborhoods. This brings with itself a data set that identifies certain races or certain neighborhoods as more dangerous. So in a way, all the data that needs to be there is given to the algorithm. The problem is that data includes our existing practices that are not fair and that are not that result in further discrimination that we want to avoid going forward. So there, we cannot just say that, oh, this doesn't represent the world. The problem is more tricky. We want to make sure that we try to clean up the data as much as possible so that we don't create further discrimination. So this is just on the data part, but then there is the algorithm. What kind of an algorithm do we choose? How much do we need to understand what the algorithm does? How much explainability do we need? When a system is recommending a movie, we may not need to be able to answer the question, why this movie, why me? But if the system is recommending that I get this particular treatment for my health condition, we may want to ask why, because there are health experts, there are other expertise in the world that we want to be able to merge this with. So here, the algorithm, the choice of algorithm becomes critical. And again, for all of these systems these systems don't exist just in the background. There is the front end of these systems. So we need to make sure that the tools as they are created communicate the information to the right team, to the right groups, to the right individuals in the right way. By which I mean, if a system for visual recognition, computer recognition, visual recognition of skin conditions that are done for rural areas don't work in low light circumstances, well, the tool itself is not that good, is it? Because if we are going for the rural areas, the light is not going to be perfect in most cases. So the user interface, the user experience has to be created in such a way that the people that we aim to provide these tools for can actually use those tools. And finally, what I mentioned earlier about the implementation part, how does the system communicate its results to the experts, to the, not necessarily experts, to the consumers as well? So how can we make sure that we partner with AI systems rather than either obey to them or dismiss them, neither of which is a good result if we think AI systems hold value. And I think that there's an agreement at this point on that one. So I already gave a number of examples. Here are some more that have been the most famous ones. The MIT news one on the left corner, down at the left corner, is the one about the facial recognition tools. The right upper corner is about the criminal justice system and how a particular risk assessment tool was discriminatory. There are also ways that the other two Facebook examples, for example, are about how the information is provided and how our feelings and how our agency is sort of like can be manipulated through different AI systems and tools. And I believe, well, not I believe, I know at least 2 or 3 of these big scandals have gone through IRB reviews and were cleared by the time of the study. So one of them is the upper left corner, judging the faces judging the sexual orientation, looking at faces. This was one of the studies coming out from Stanford. And the lower right corner, the Facebook mood study, where Facebook did A/B testing on their users to see if they can impact their mood to be happier or to be depressed. Those two were cleared from IRBs. The others are usually commercial tools, so they don't go through the same research ethics structures as academic or the at least publishable research does. So just to wrap this part up, some of the most common AI ethics issues that we are facing with is unjustified bias. So the bias itself, as a technical term, has to be a part of the AI system. For AI systems to be able to function, they have to be able to, in a technical way, discriminate between data and be able to make sense of the data. What we are concerned about is the unjustified bias. And both in the case of the skin tone and the facial recognition tools, and in the case of the criminal justice system, what we are talking about is unjustified bias. Violation of privacy is another very important topic, of course, with the data, especially given that the data is so increasingly more, there are increasingly more ways to identify the de-identified data, which I'm going to get to in a bit as well. Lack of transparency about how does the system work, or even many cases, when is an AI system involved in some outcome. Problem of accuracy. So accuracy is often, the discussion about accuracy can be made very superficially, saying that this tool is 90% accurate, or this tool is 85% accurate. But this doesn't actually tell us where does the harm occur and what is the impact. So what we want to know is when the system is not accurate, are we talking about false positives or false negatives? And what does it mean in a given situation? So think about it like this. For example, for a research, for an AI system that's developed for cancer detection, and let's say that we have a cure or we have a treatment for this particular cancer, we want to make sure that we minimize the false negatives so that everyone because having extra false, having too many false negatives basically means that we are missing so many people who have cancer and who are not getting the treatment. So if we err on the side of getting false positive, meaning that we subject certain people who do not have cancer to extra tests to ensure that whether or not they have cancer, given this particular situation, that is the harm that we should be willing to take. On the other hand, in the case of criminal justice system, for example, the question is, it's the other way around. We don't want to get people into the criminal justice system if they are innocent. So we want to minimize the false negatives. We want to minimize false positives. We don't want to identify people as you have committed a crime. We want to make sure that we can miss some criminal activity for the sake of not jailing innocent people. So it depends, the accuracy question from the ethics perspective highly depends on where the harm lies and exactly in what context we are talking about. Limitation of human agency, well, I've already mentioned this also in relation to the human-computer interaction. Manipulation, you can think of the Facebook mood study, but you could also think about how the world is structured, what we know. So if you think about agency as making decisions given the relevant information, if we structure the information, we structure the agency in some sense. We impact the agency. So by any search engine, any platform that provides and structures information is open to manipulating the user. So we want to take extra care on making sure that manipulation does not happen, or at least the user is aware of the risks. And the lack of accountability, the AI systems from their research until their implementation involve many people, many organizations, which means that it is increasingly different to say when something goes wrong, whose fault was it? And who should, more than who is fault, what we want to make sure we do is how to rectify it, who should be responsible for rectifying it. Well, we need to start building systems where we can assign these responsibilities and accountability. So in that sense, in order to look at all of these things, what we do is an analysis looking at it from a very political and moral philosophy perspective. We look at it from the perspective of individual autonomy. We look at it from the perspective of benefit versus harm. And we look at it from the perspective of social justice and fairness. And we try to determine what is the right action, what is the right choice or rule. And these 3 points are very, very familiar, of course. They are the traditional bioethics principles, which summarize the moral and political theories, and which are also pointed out, well, which also build the foundation of the Belmont report, and therefore the research ethics structure that we employ today in the US, but also around the world through this bioethics principles. So this was a very long-winded way of getting to the research part of things, but it is very important that we look at it in a way in this, starting from the broader aspect, coming to the specific question that we are trying to discuss, which is how should we think about research AI and AI ethics? Because in the end, what we want to make sure is, what is the goal? The goal is to make sure that we create these AI systems in a way that are ethical. And for that, the research part, how can we make sure that we do the research part as securely, as efficiently, as ethically as possible? So we can think about the research and AI ethics question in 2 ways. One is how to ensure AI research and research with AI is conducted ethically. And the other one is how to use AI in research ethics and research administration. So in one of them, as research oversight bodies, we are basically looking at, okay, how do we make sure that the research is done ethically? And the other one, we are looking at sort of like to ourselves and say, how can we use AI to make sure that we do our job better? So this takes us to 2 different questions, but really very related questions. One is research ethics oversight mechanism, and the other one is tools for research oversight. So I'm going to first focus on this one, and this is really the bulk of the rest of my talk. And then I'm going to go to the tools part more briefly, and I hope it will become clear why, because I think a lot of the things that we discuss in how to think about what is okay in research, how should researchers use AI, applies to how should research administrators use AI as well. So the typical research ethics model consists of research ethics boards, IRBs, and principles. And the principles being the Belmont report principles, traditionally speaking, those 4 principles, 3 principles, and then the codes that are built on those principles. But the foundation are the principles, 3 principles. 3 or 4, depending on how you count, minimization of harm and maximization of benefit, or just simply saying do no harm as a part of the beneficence principle. So here's the first problem that we have, which is that the Belmont report or these principles, as they are currently used, don't really guide us well. They don't give us sufficient guidance in dealing with AI-related questions and AI research-related questions. So because of the time, I'm going to try to go a little fast, but here are the information will be on the slides anyway. So if we think about the applications of these 3 principles in Belmont report, we have informed consent, we have private information, so keep it the privacy of information, we have risk benefit assessment, and we have the elimination or minimization of discrimination and bias. So starting from the informed consent, there are multiple issues that AI and big data poses. So a lot of the research happens in online setting or uses on data that comes from online setting, from publicly available sources in the online virtual world, basically. Currently, the publicly available data is understood as the data that we share on our, could be on this, let's say on our social media platforms, just as a one example. And the way that I agree for this information to be used as a part of research is because I agree to the terms and conditions, and the terms and conditions in many cases include the research being my consent for research being done using my data. But knowing the actual informed consent structure, where we expect the person to read, understand, and make a decision, of course, whatever we click on in terms and conditions and cookies and settings is not informed consent. It's the pretense of consent. So from an ethics perspective, we can even say that this is irrelevant. I never know what I give, and I never know for what purposes this is given. And I don't really know what control I have. And if I wanted to spend my time really making sure that I always pay attention to what data I provide, I share. I believe this was a study that was done already about 8 years ago. I have a thumbs down. Sorry, that's not what I meant. I believe it was 8 years ago. The study suggested already that back then we would have spent about 80 days of our lives just reading terms and conditions. That's back then. Now, of course, the number like skyrocketed. So it is not rational for us to be paying attention to all of the possible consent scenarios. There is a raised hand. Okay, there are more raised hands. If these are questions.
Yeah, if you have a question, sorry to interrupt. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. We're monitoring that section for Q&A. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. If it is something about like you cannot hear me or something, then of course that's a different story. All right. So that's one part of the informed consent problem. Another one is, what about the secondary use of data? Do we even know where the data, when data is ethically sourced versus not? How do we use third-party models? So can I use, as an ethical researcher, can I use a model that is created outside but commercially available? But how do I know whether that model was built on data that was ethically sourced? So we don't have this sort of like the fair trade structure where we can check whether the data until coming to me was structured in an ethical way. And then, of course, withdrawing from research. How do I even withdraw from research in this online world where a lot of my data is sold or already used or already a part of part of models? The second bulk is the privacy question. A part of the respect for autonomy, of course, comes with this demand for privacy. And we do have mechanisms like GDPR to find ways of saying that, no, we need to still provide options for privacy and you cannot just use any data. But the problem is that increasingly there are like two things happening at the same time. Technologically speaking, we keep figuring out better technologies for keeping the privacy, such as like federated learning. But at the same time, on the other hand, we keep figuring out how to identify data from de-identified data. So with these two sort of like competing, it's very difficult to say that right now, giving my information to this particular research really will keep my data private going forward. And what is privacy in this AI context is also we need to ask the question, well, often what you predict about me is not from the data that belongs to me, but that belongs to people like me. So when can I be free from prediction by saying that I don't want to be a part of, I don't want to be put in a bucket, I don't want to be put in a group, or in a different way, can I say that I share my data because it's my choice? Well, what about everybody else's privacy sort of that I am outing? And data ownership is a major question that is being discussed. Who should own the data? Is it individual? Is it a social good? We have not sorted these questions out yet. On the risk and benefit part, since the technology evolves in an astonishing speed, it is very difficult even for us to be able to say, what are the potential harms? Like if you join this research, or if you become a part of as your data or as test subject, if you become a part of this particular protocol, what are the risks that we can really foresee? And this is particularly the case because a lot of the AI systems have dual use. So they can be used for multiple purposes. And also they are often systems that we don't fully understand what's going on inside. And another very important thing is that we have a definition of minimal risk in the research ethics that relies on your normal life as the threshold. However, our normal life online or in relation to AI systems currently is so unregulated that it already opens a lot of risks that should probably not be considered as minimal risk. And finally, the discrimination bias question is the one that has been in the spotlight together with the privacy because of already the examples that I have given. How do we think that the data becomes representative? What data is representative? How do we make sure that we get rid of the existing fairness related issues that's embedded in the data? How can we make sure that a lot of the times these scandalous AI systems, AI research also happened not because the researchers were unaware. They tried to mask everything. They tried to mask all the protected categories and all the known proxies like zip codes and so on. But once you have big data and complex algorithms, systems find ways of differentiating and basically finding new proxies. So how do we make sure that we do really steer clear from all these proxies that point towards the protected categories? And of course, keep in mind that there is now a further concern, which is as we use AI systems to create content, there's a feedback loop. More correct or incorrect, but structured outcome is put on into the world. AI systems learn from this. So AI starts learning from AI output. So something that is incorrect gets incorporated in the feedback loop. And again, keep in mind, there's as a part of the discrimination and bias, we are mostly talking about English-speaking world. Large language models don't work in the same way in different languages. They don't learn as much in different languages. And the translation, sometimes they translate to each other, and those translations have different issues. So there are increasingly complex problems that we are dealing with the AI systems. So we've done quite a lot of work already on this, but continuing to do more work currently as well at the Institute. So these are the work that I did before joining the Institute at the AI Ethics Lab. AI Ethics Lab is an independent initiative of mine that that has been going on since 2017. So we created some city training webinars and training modules, articles, and we are currently, again, as I said, at the Institute working on these questions further, as they are super important and very important for us to figure out. And to that goal, so if the Belmont report is not sufficient, then how do we think about all of these different principles, if the principles are at the core of research ethics? So one thing that was interesting that happened early on was that all around the world, this kind of like took off around 2016 and 17, well, actually 2017. Around the world, countries, companies, and intergovernmental organizations started publishing AI ethics principles. So we structured that. We did a project on this one called the Dynamics of AI Principles, and we have seen that, you know, from the 2015, where there were just 4 documents, by the time 2021, we had over 100 documents, and we stopped counting after that. But what we did with all of these documents is that we collected and structured all the principles that are being mentioned under these 4 main categories of the traditional bioethics principles. Again, why do we use bioethics as the bioethics or research ethics as the structure? Well, because that is a summary of the moral and political philosophical theories. So from that, we created this tool called the box. This is the first version of it from AI Ethics Lab. Then we created another version at the Institute, a third version with the UN and Interpol for a toolkit for law enforcement. And the 4th version is in progress. Basically, we are iterating and making it better every time. This is the one that's available publicly, and hopefully we'll put the last version soon out as well. Here, what we try to do is all of these instrumental principles that we are discussing, how can we list them so that 1, we don't forget them, and 2, in the application of this tool, we ask questions that are concerning these instrumental principles depending on the stage. So when you're asking at the research phase a privacy question, that might be about the research subject or the data that you are, the privacy of the data that you are using. When you are asking the privacy question at the design of the user interface section, then we are talking about questions related to how do you give users privacy settings, for example, as they are engaging with AI systems. So we keep the principles, we keep the concerns, but we change the questions according to the stage that the AI system goes throughout the innovation process. And the goal here is to make sure that all the principles are satisfied to a certain degree, and most importantly, the goal of these instrumental principles, which is the protecting the autonomy, reducing harm, and ensuring justice, those core goals are satisfied. So it is possible that maybe privacy cannot be protected in an AI system, but it is through proper consent structure, so that might be okay. So we are looking at the bigger picture. What is the goal? The goal is to make sure that we hit these core values. So this was all about the principles, because principles create a big, one of the main tools of the research ethics structure. Principles are being used by the IRB system, and the IRB system consists of a board, and it has a particular composition. So from the US rules and regulations, the IRB composition. Okay, so let me sort of like wrap up what I just said, in the sense that the principles, and the Belmont report and our current research ethics instruments are not sufficiently guiding us in how to deal with the research that involves AI or that is on AI. So now the question is, if the principles and the guidance is not really there, how do we deal with the IRB structure? So IRB composition here, first let's focus on the composition of the IRB. So the current requirements is that at least one member of the IRB has to have primary concern in the scientific area, and at least one member whose primary concerns are in non-scientific areas. And it says IRB must have members with sufficient knowledge of the specific scientific disciplines relevant to the research that it reviews. So this sentence says that it expects that the IRBs should have expertise in AI if they are going to review research that is on AI or with AI. But keep in mind that none of this requires expertise in ethics. And why is this problematic? Why is this important? Because as we just looked at it, the current guidelines are not sufficient. So if there is no expertise in ethics and if there are no very clear guidelines, how does an IRB make ethical decisions? And a lot of the times, the decisions will require us to go way beyond these instruments, even if we have detailed these guidelines, given that the systems, the issues keep changing all the time, much faster than before in research. And the other problem is that AI introduces novel questions. So we cannot look at previous IRB decisions and so on. We cannot use precedents. And the way that we deal with these questions, the way that we analyze these questions in this existing structure is simply not sufficient to make sure that we address all the AI ethics questions. And here, I think the most important thing to point out is that IRBs are involved in the research at the beginning and in the research phase. And yes, we are talking about research. That's the whole topic that we have here. But the AI risk, the main risks that AI poses, just think about all the examples that I provided with the, the facial recognition technologies or the autocompletes that show when you are searching for vaccination-related information that take you to anti-vaccination pages, for example, systems that have racial bias in them in healthcare. These problems, these scandal cases have not happened in terms of research. The research subjects were not the ones that were at risk here. The ones who are at risk are often the users. So in the IRB structure where we pay so much attention to the risks of research, we are actually missing out on the main issue that the AI research, broadly speaking, as it goes through the innovation life cycle, is posing. So again, think about it as like what is the foundational question that research ethics relies on? The foundational premise is that, let me see if I have a, no, I don't have the slides for this. But so the foundational issue that research ethics relies on is that research poses unique risks. And it does so, especially when we are looking at the research ethics history with the biomedical research and experimentation. It does so because the usual safeguarding mechanisms through doctor-patient relationship or through hospital settings are not available. So we are worried that the research poses risks to research subjects that you don't have it once we complete the research phase, because the physicians or the rest of the biomedical setting pays attention to those who are being impacted. In AI, it's the opposite. The research phase poses very little risk, whereas comparatively speaking, very little risk, whereas the development, design, and the rest of the innovation cycle poses huge risks. So we need a system that really recognizes from the get-go, because research is, again, still the most important part where we are setting it up, but looks out for the rest of the innovation cycle. And boards and principles are not sufficient for this. So I'm gonna skip this part, I'm gonna go very fast on these two slides because we can get into this in the questions and answers if need be, but we are using a model that integrates ethics into the whole AI life cycle. And we do this, so this is the original model from AI Ethics Lab, and this is the structure that we have built on at Northeastern at the Institute for Experiential AI. Basically, we make sure that we put in place governance structures for AI innovation and AI use. We make sure that every AI product goes through a AI ethics risk analysis, impact analysis, through and through. It's a part of the whole development cycle. innovation cycle. And we make sure that we have the trainings structured in such a way that people who are engaging with the ethical questions are able to answer these ethical questions. So why is this integration, this broader integration, relevant to the research ethics mechanisms? Well, because in many ways, we can use the existing research ethics mechanism to reinforce a structure like this. Meaning, instead of having this clear division where the research ethics and research ethics mechanisms that we have right now, IRBs and principles, are concerned with the research phase only and trying to predict what can go wrong in the future because they don't really have continuing engagement. We can create a structure where the ethics integration is required by the IRBs. So instead of putting all the weight on the research ethics boards like the IRBs and research ethics boards outside of the US to assess, analyze, and predict every possible scenario before it arises, before it goes through this whole innovation cycle, the requirement can shift towards what kind of ethics integration should be there in order for AI innovation or AI research to happen ethically going forward. So instead of checking whether the research protocol answers all the ethical questions, we can look at whether the research protocol shows that a reasonable, robust ethics integration for the whole innovation cycle, putting in place teams, expertise, a workflow, a process that ensures that ethics is a part of the innovation from the research phase until the very end. And of course, if this is the direction that the IRB should take, this should be reflected in the policies, because we cannot have IRBs being held responsible for all the ethical risks while the way they operate is to looking at the ethical mechanisms that are put in place in the research and in the innovation cycle. So the policy, of course, should reflect this, and the decisions that happens in the policy space should also understand that there are different levels of risk categories and different ways of ethics integration should happen in research and innovation in general and implementation in general. So I know that I have technically, we agreed for an hour. I have technically 7 minutes left, but I have a little bit more. Just, it's not too much. We are going to have enough time for questions and answers. So let me just go quickly for this part as well. So how to use, now we've discussed how to think about use of AI in research and doing research on AI. And now we are asking, well, for the research administration, how should we think about using AI systems? It's kind of the similar mindset, isn't it? Because what we want to make sure is that we still hold on to this whole principles. We want to make sure that the research administrators and reviewers can still have hit all of these core values and the instruments. We want to make sure that, for example, if it is a proposal that requires explain a bit, if we need to understand how the system is developed, well, if we are using an AI system, we need to be able to understand how that AI system analyzes the research protocol, or if it is matching about what is out there in terms of patents and existing work and proposed work, the outcome, well, we need to understand how did it say this is highly original or this is not highly original. Can the researcher come back and say, I object, I think the decision has a mistake. When that happens, how does the administration can go back to the AI system that they use and make sure that they can identify what went wrong or did not go wrong? So similar things. What are the accuracy claims that we want from the AI systems that we want to use, that we are going to use in research administration? Where is the harm? Do we want to make more mistakes by rejecting research, or do we want to make more mistakes by sometimes giving a go-ahead to research that maybe had some problems? So all of these are, just like we are analyzing the AI systems for research, now we are analyzing AI systems for research administration. And we can do this immediately with the LLMs, for example. So this is one of the things that are being most discussed throughout the whole, in all organizations for multiple uses. So when we think about the LLMs, the large language models, so one thing that we need to be very, very careful about is that large language models, unlike, for example, search engines, are not rule-based. Well, search engines are not rule-based either, but large language models are really about predicting the next word, predicting the next sentence. And they do this by adding also some sort of net randomization. So when we think about what does the ChatGPT result says versus the search result says, the ChatGPT result, for example, is a lot more unreliable in its accuracy, because it is not about accuracy. It's not trying to give you the right answer, or it's not trying to find the right source from the internet. It is just trying to predict the next word and next sentence. So it has a completely different way of operating, which also means that, all of these hallucinations that are being told in research. So hallucinations is a terrible word, by the way, because that way of talking about AI systems almost make them human-like or an agent-like, like agent as in like an intentional agent-like, whereas of course they are not. So they don't really hallucinate, but they make errors, and errors that are so interesting. So you could convince the large language model that says, so we did these tests, for example, where we asked where is the highest capital in Europe. And initially it gives the right answer. And then we then tell the system, well, actually, this is wrong. The highest capital is here, not there. And it says, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, of course. So it makes errors, it corrects itself, and sometimes it outright gives the wrong information. It understands that an academic paper comes with citation. So it creates fake citations, that those papers never exist. It gives reasons for things that have not happened. One of my colleagues, according to ChatGPT, is dead. And when we ask, how did he die? It says cancer, because, well, for his age group, yes, the most likely cause of death is cancer. But did he die from cancer? No, he's well and alive, thank God. So the system really just predicts what's the next word. So it is not truth and accuracy oriented. So for LLMs, for any use of LLMs, for chatbots, for other systems, what we want to do is to first go through an ethics, risks, and opportunity analysis. We don't want to, so we want to look at the risks, but we want to also look at the opportunities, because we don't want to bring in a system that is unnecessarily complex with very little value added. So once we do this analysis, we have a sense of what to safeguard, what to look out for. Then we can do some testing and sandboxing. So not go all in, but give some use cases, have some particular uses where we test the system and keep note on where does it go wrong. So human in the loop becomes very crucial here, because fact checking, for example, is human in the loop. When you look at the citation and when you check for the citation, that's a way to make sure that your expertise and the AI expertise combines. And troubleshooting, of course, if the system is, if you have some interaction with the operation of the system, so you can fix some of the mistakes, or you can ask the provider company to be aware of the mistakes. And as you implement any AI system into an organization for whatever purpose, it's what we need to make sure is that we have some monitoring and accountability structures put in place from the very start. So we want to make sure that we have an organization structure where questions are documented, issues are documented, and in this organization structure, it is escalated to the right party. So it's not just locked up in one innovation teams or one research administration team's notebook, rather it is shared with whatever is the central documentation and monitoring structure is. And then again, troubleshooting. So we never stop troubleshooting because we never stop monitoring, basically. And finally, we need to make sure that we create the structure, create guidelines, workflows, and user interfaces that really serves our purpose. So who is using the system? If we are using an LLM system, a ChatGPT type of system for a particular goal. So like, again, like let's say grant reviews, that may require one type of user interface, whereas if we are going to create one for the researchers to use, because we can presumably educate and train the research administration team, a smaller team, much better, and make sure that they keep an eye on and monitor the problems better than if it goes out to all researchers and bigger institutions where we have less control on them. So we want to make sure that the user interface gives a lot of information. And I believe this is the end of my presentation. Actually, right on time.
Thank you so much, Chansu. That was a fascinating discussion. I'm sure that the audience would agree with that. And I'm very interested to share with you questions. And I would encourage everyone who is on the webinar to please use the Q&A and share your perspectives, comments, and any questions you may have. There is a question from one of our attendees about plagiarism, just simply asking, is there a reason that plagiarism isn't included as an ethics concern, particularly with generative AI? I wonder what your thoughts are about that, since plagiarism is, very much in the attention of higher education. And I think there's some follow-up compliance questions as well to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think back of the box that I presented, so on the left hand, we have the autonomy, harm, benefit, and justice. Those don't change because those are really the main concerns that we are aiming at. On the right hand, we had right next to that next column, right column, had human control, agency, privacy, consent, and all of those are really instruments that we are paying attention to. So in the higher education, plagiarism definitely slots in somewhere there. You can say plagiarism goes directly with the justice part because it's unfair for someone to use another person's work, or you can put it in the harm benefit part, depending on where does it tie most closely. And I haven't thought about this already. So most of these, by the way, of course, tie to all three concerns. It's an autonomy concern because it's my work being used. It's a harm benefit concern because it's harmful for having research being done without credit, and it's a fairness concern. Probably most closely tied to fairness, so probably goes in there, but it's definitely there. It's just that what we need to do is when we go sector by sector, we want to, whatever is the nuances in that sector, we want to make sure that, yes, it's explicitly included in that checklist that we are working with.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful response. I wonder if you could say more about that issue of fairness. Do you think that fairness should be focused on the outcomes, on the process? Is there something we can think about which is fair information practices, or should we be focused on fair outcomes in the use of information? I'm just curious how you think all of that filters in through the AI framework.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a great question because it's such a difficult question, Michelle.
I know.
So basically, I think so. Going very back to the theories, we have competing fairness theories. There, we already are in trouble. So we cannot. When people say, for example, if an AI researcher says that we have optimized our model for fairness, that means nothing, because what does it mean? Is it equal outcomes, as you said? Is it equal treatment? Like, what is it that you optimized for? And depending on the circumstances, we have different ways of thinking about fairness. Sometimes we want the equal outcome, sometimes we want equal treatment, sometimes we want vulnerable populations to be further protected, discriminated positively, right? So there are different ways that we think are fair. So what I would say, sort of like a combination of this and making it very explicit, making sure that all these decisions are explicitly made, so written down, right? This is the way we interpreted fairness for this model. Here's how we maximize it. And by the end of it, how do you use it? Because in certain circumstances, so again, let's think back about the over-policing and the criminal justice, the policing AIs, systems that are for predictive policing, for example. In one way to say is that, you know what, let's not change any of the data. Let's include all of the unfairness that's going on in the world. And that shows us where we should take different action. We shouldn't maybe send in more police, but what we should do is we should send in more social services. We should seeing where the unfairness happens, an AI system, you may want to keep it like that. And that might be the fair use of the AI system. So it starts with documenting your choices, making sure what the purpose of the model is, communicating the purpose to the user very well, because that is the link that we are missing massively. And then making sure as a user, as an implementation, as a professional user, as a professional organization, that you do use the system correctly.
I love that response. And I just have one follow-up question, and we're starting to get lots of questions in the chat. So I'm going to indulge me with one more question, and then I'll jump to all of those questions that are in the Q&A. And that is, so given that, immediately and I'm really glad you pointed out that ChatGPT is a probabilistic model and not an accuracy model, because I think a lot of people sort of think that ChatGPT is like something like Wikipedia that can be queried verbally, which it is not. So given that many of the AI tools that we're using are developed in the private sector, how does that play into this fairness issue? Can we really expect a fair and equitable AI tool when, one would presume there's a commercial intent underlying the development of that technology?
Again, great question. And in the current structure, no, we cannot. So what we try to do, and this goes, well beyond research and goes to all AI system developments. So what we try to do is by insisting on certain questions that we need to ask. Let's say we are using it in research administration, and we want to say that here are the questions that we have to ask before we start using this in our organizations. Once you start making this as a norm, then you are putting pressure on the companies to be able to answer those questions as well. If you say that, look, we have a procurement leg, but the procurement will not go forward until you answer these questions related to your model, then there is a reason for. Unfortunately, ethics is all about incentives. We have to put in place the incentives in such a way, and it's a multiplayer incentive game, right? We want to make sure that we put enough demand on the private sector so that they have a reason to answer this. And that reason is not just their hearts, but rather this is the business model. We are not going to be able to sell to the biggest universities our services if we cannot answer questions related to the fairness, questions related to plagiarism, questions related to accuracy.
And then it loops right back around to us. Then it's our responsibility to provide that due diligence. You have a comment from Diana Boglin, just fantastic presentation. I wanted to share that because I think she speaks for all of us. Lori Schultz asks, the Belmont report addresses protecting an individual, not a community, which creates questions about Indigenous data sovereignty. How do you see these playing out in AI ethics?
So, very good question. Again, I love these questions. So I think, the reason why I insist, and sometimes I think it becomes a little, I may sound a little too strict on this, but I insist continuously that ethics has to include philosophers. We cannot do ethics with a checklist, just like you cannot go through major law cases with a pamphlet. We need ethics that are done by philosophers. And the reason why I connected to this question is because Belmont report is a very, very, very simplified version of the Kantian ethics, which focuses on individual decision-making and rationality. And that's where our respect for autonomy comes from, the utilitarian and consequentialist way of thinking about harm and benefit, and at least 5 well-structured theories of justice. And once this is the background of the Belmont report, the community question is very tightly connected to the justice and fairness issue. So we can, it's like Rawlsian ethics, for example, Rawlsian theory would bring us immediately to the vulnerable population, would give immediate attention to what goes on with the vulnerable populations. And that is necessary. We cannot just say bumper sticker, like equal treatment, equal opportunity. No, there's more, and all of that richness is captured once we know the theories in the background. And they are complicated, but philosophers are equipped, especially applied ethicists, are equipped to deal with these questions, of course, always in collaboration with the relevant other disciplines. So we need to have representatives of indigenous communities so that we can't just reason from out of nowhere, right? Like we need to understand what are the concerns, where does the harm occur? Because that's another thing. When we talk about impact and harm, we often, as a privileged, highly educated community, we cannot fathom how the harm occurs. So we need to have the representatives, the stakeholders, the most vulnerable groups bringing their concerns so that then philosophers can reason and AI scientists can find solutions and we keep an eye on the structure.
Thank you so much. Another question on plagiarism. Do you have any research evidence regarding AI creating plagiarism among users working independently from each other?
I don't.
Do you think we should look into that? Would you consider that to be a priority for research in this field?
I wonder, because I think, I think the direction of the question is absolutely interesting, but I wonder if this is somehow going to be dealt with through the intellectual property related questions, like the IP related questions, because we are in a mess in terms of IP at the moment. And both in terms of how systems like ChatGPT is dealing with it, but also in terms of like deep fakes and representing being as if somebody and so on. So there is a very, very complex IP question. And I suspect plagiarism will be mostly answered within that.
That's a very interesting thought. Yeah, I think a lot of academics, I'm glad that question got raised a couple of times, because I think a lot of academics are really focused in on that plagiarism issue. I don't want to speak for all because I know there's so many other areas to go into, but as we create content, right? We do lots of things, but as researchers, we all are content creators as well. And as that content, and we're encouraged to disseminate that content publicly. And so then it can become consumed by all kinds of information platforms. And so I think all of us are very worried about what is the outcome of the use of that content. Will it be distorted? Will it be used in its original intent? Will the context be lost? And once the context is lost, do we still have integrity to the original, sort of thrust of that content? That's one whole set of concerns. Then a whole other set of concerns, of course, has to do with attribution, recognition of the labor, and then laid within that, of course, is a very differential system already existing, which privileges some people in sort of receiving credit and disadvantages others. And so one gets the idea that very quickly one's contributions could be lost in a sea of AI algorithms. I don't know what your thoughts about all of that are, but I know there's a lot of angst in the academic community.
Yeah.
Another question that we have: how can we review and evaluate existing AI tools and LLMs specifically? Do you think there's a practical way to find out if ethical concerns have been addressed in their innovation cycles? Oh, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this points to one of the, a bigger issue that I sort of, I think like assumed in the presentation. So all of the structure that we should have in place, this ethics integration structure, is not in place. In fact, the responsible AI and AI ethics does not have standards in place. So once we start, so unfortunately, so I'm gonna sort of like point towards like what should be there so that we can have this information. Well, if we can have a structure, if we can have a system where as private companies develop these tools, they are required to communicate some of the data. Another thing that we can have in the meantime is partnering with researchers and ask them to sandbox it, test it, monitor it. So we do a lot of audits, for example, at the Institute. And a lot of the times this is sort of the goal, right? Like, because we don't know what the model actually was created like. We don't know the model. We are not given access to the details of the model, but can we run multiple different input through that to see where it goes wrong? Can we say that, oh, actually, it seems to be discriminatory towards this group versus this group? So we try to do all of these, or can we get some sort of explainability out of this model? So we try to do all of those in all AI systems. And there are, again, multiple researchers across universities. So I would generally, and this is something that I say to all sectors, I would generally recommend partnering with academia. It's in the world of things, academia is relatively a cheaper resource. And it is a resource that, it's inherently curious resource. So academics already want to do this. They just need reasons and excuses to do this. So it's a good way of partnering as well.
What I love about this presentation, especially for our community, is that, this is a community, as you well know, that is really interested in research administration and how we can bring efficiency and efficacy to the supports around faculty research. But by giving us such an in-depth look at some of the sort of underpinning logic to the way in which we would evaluate AI, in your framework, I think it helps give this community a lot of insight about the complex knowledge world that we live in as researchers, while we simultaneously try to figure out how to provide and scaffold that effort going forward. And, much of the theme of this conference has been on, all the work that we do and we do in earnest with our partners, our partner institutions and federal partners, to try to make administrative tools as useful as possible. However, one always wonders if we're just chasing so far behind where the field is going. I'll leave you with that thought. There's a couple more questions here. So one is AI something that could ever really be truly legally depended on in terms of legal ethics? Not referring to state legal ethics for lawyers, but referring to the reliance upon AI by compliance professionals, for example, who may rely on AI in aiding us to get to a conclusion. There's another part to this question. It sounds like you're saying no from the idea that probability model versus accuracy. It sounds more like AI's true usefulness, especially when considering ethics comes from basic office work, such as creating templates or pulling information together for us as humans to analyze and make our own decisions on what we prefer to use. I wonder what your thoughts are, how you might respond to that set of comments.
Yeah. So I think it's a bit more, I would approach it a little bit differently. So the way that I would say is that AI is definitely useful. So the reason, so as an ethicist, you always sound very cautious and scared. But the reason why I work on AI is because I think AI is extremely important and valuable, in the sense that in the current world, what we are trying to do oftentimes is to make decisions using an extreme amounts of data. So I come from healthcare. I've worked very long time with public health schools and medical schools and taught at them as well. So one of the things that I find a good example is we always talk about evidence-based medicine, but evidence-based medicine is rarely really what we understand in this layman's terms. Yes, it is evidence-based because we do clinical data, clinical trials and so on, collect data. But the thing is, usually people like me are not in the clinical trials. I'm female. That already means that chances that I'm included in clinical trials is extremely low. Because of many ethical reasons, women are not included in clinical trials most often. And then you have to slice it towards more and more towards who I am, right? My age, my weight. So all of these are very relevant for my health, but clinical trials medicine usually does not have evidence about people like me. So here you go to the physician and you ask for evidence-based medicine, and there simply is no way for that physician to provide you that. On the other hand, we have so much data about our health in health records, right? I go to the hospital, people like me go to the hospital. We have been treated for different things. There has been, and the other thing is because there has not been a use of AI, there has been a huge variation in how we got treated, and the outcomes documented. And the drug interactions documented. So there is a lot of information. Bringing that information, analyzing that information, that could give me an evidence-based medicine, people like me, really about me. So it goes more than just like back office. It's really about generating knowledge and generating information and figuring out how to move forward in a world where there's so much important data out there. And human should not be above that, like, because when I say that we cannot process all this data, all these different variables, what I mean is that we also cannot say whether the AI is right or wrong when it's processing that. So human cannot be above that, saying that I don't think this is correct. But the only way to make sure that human and AI work together is, for example, if the AI, when it's providing its recommendation, can show, here are the main things that I took into consideration, and this is my confidence level, and this is the potential, this is generally my accuracy, and here are the false positive negatives that so giving me the relevant information as an expert, I can say, this sounds wrong because you took into account a population that lives in rural area, and she lives in the metropolitan area. Then we can go back and tweak the AI system. So there has to be a communication in a way, and that is not non-existent today. It's just not good enough. So I would say that AI, the human is definitely not on top of it, should not just get the feedback and we shouldn't make our own decision in that same sense. We should make collaborative decision in a way with AI systems, and we should be comfortable using AI for very important big decisions, because there is no way around it, in the sense that not it is inevitable in a capitalistic sense. It is inevitable because we want this progress. From an ethics perspective, we need this progress. In order to get rid of our biases as well, we need this progress. So it's just that we need to structure it such a way that we can catch the problems all the time, early on, but all the time. We never stop asking.
Such a good point. Kernal Chalera asks, can AI generated data provide the resources about where it got the data? Another concern is that AI can generate data that is copyrighted. What are your thoughts about that?
Can AI generate data that's copyrighted already?
Yes. Can it generate copyrighted data that can be copyrighted?
That can be
copyrighted. And then what?
Yeah. Well, okay. So copyright question and the IP question, it really goes beyond my abilities to answer because I'm not a legal scholar. But from can it, in the sense? Yes. I mean, we know that AI does take a lot from the copyrighted materials and sometimes provide things that are extremely similar. So it's very, like, I don't know the legal progress that we are going to do in that area, but of course, in some sense, we can definitely say that that should fall under the existing copyrights. And the other question, can it create new copyrighted materials? I suppose so, but we need to have mechanisms that puts in place, when does this outcome of AI belongs to whom or for what purpose? And that's why I think that the plagiarism question is very much related to all of this. How do we think about the knowledge that goes into AI and that comes out of AI in terms of the intellectual value of it? And what do we want to do? And I just want to add one last thing. Something that we have been discussing in our community is in the AI ethics is that it's very important that we don't just try to build on existing structures. Sometimes we need to change our understanding. Sometimes we need to ask the question, like privacy is a good example, or consent is a good example. We need to ask the question, what was the original purpose of consent? And what is the purpose that we now want? And how can we best achieve this? Maybe consent is not the right tool anymore. What is privacy in this current setup? Understanding what matters in privacy, how do you protect that? So same goes for the intellectual property. What is the purpose of intellectual property? What do we want to protect? And what do we want it to be available for further use? And how do we want it to be available for further use? And now we structure it. So I know this is taking us to even more work to be done, but it's also, I mean, certain times in human history, you need to restructure things. And I think we are at that time of human history that we need to take a look back and say, which ones are we keeping and which ones are we revising?
I think that's, very well said. I'm really glad in your presentation that you pointed out this sort of bias of information that exists to be mined that's in English and kind of comes from a Western, I'm gonna add, comes from a Western, maybe a Western, privilege is a Western set of content and information. What do you think we can do about that? I mean, this will be the last question. We don't have any more in the chat. What do you think we can do about that problem?
Absolutely, super, super important. And also another thing to keep in mind is that, when we say we have all the data available, well, certain data is just not available if you are in oppressive governments, for example, that they don't provide the data.
Yeah, really
even if it's there, it's just not available for research. And then you have the wrong, the AI system has the wrong perception of what's going on in that government, in that country, or in that community. So it's very important that, so what can we do? I guess one thing is that we just need to keep in mind that the world goes beyond English speaking world and just privileged countries. And we want to make sure that we create structures, we encourage research in areas of the world that is not so privileged, and making sure that we don't go and impose our views in those areas as we do research, but actually incorporate and empower the areas themselves. So properly collaborating with universities where the research takes place. It's very important that we don't think about the countries that we have not engaged with as countries that lack intellectual abilities. So making sure and I think this actually is very important from the research administration side as well, or, we should demand this. We should demand a proper collaboration with whoever or whatever we are trying to do. And the other thing is just being mindful in the way that we take note. So if a system is developed just in the Western context, as we are commercializing it or as it goes through the innovation process, let's make sure that there's almost like a labeling there saying that, well, this was only used, this is the limitations. We don't know what it says about other cultures. Maybe now is not the right time. Maybe we don't have the data to do the research in different cultures, but that would be a note for further research. There is a gap there, and that can be addressed. So keeping note, and I think this goes for a lot of the times for ethics. Sometimes we don't have the answer, or sometimes we don't have the resources to find the answer. Take a note, and we should be okay with being uncomfortable. Sometimes we proceed even though the accuracy is not comfortable, but we take a note, we make it out there, we make ourselves in a way vulnerable that this was not the perfect accuracy that we wanted, but take a note, make it explicit so that somebody else can work on it.
Well, thank you so very much for your presentation. It was fascinating, and for your very thoughtful responses to all of the questions that came your way. On behalf of the FDP, we're really grateful to you, Canca, for this time that you have spent with us, and we hope you won't be a stranger. So with that, we will conclude this plenary session, and we'll look for everybody in the breakout sessions coming up at 2:15. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.